Without further ado, yep, thanks, Ashley. If you haven't signed in, please do. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and get started. I have just a few slides to get us started, introduce myself, talk about the workshop a little bit, and then we'll get started with some code. So bear with me through the slides. Thank you all for coming. My name is Matt Wells. We'll get to that in just a second. But yeah, this is going to be our introduction to React.js. Whoops, I had the wrong window focused. So yeah, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Matt Wells. I am a professional software developer at level.io, which is a software consulting company here in Charlotte. I graduated from UNCC in 2020 with my bachelor's in computer science, and I'm currently pursuing my master's at UNCC, also in computer science. So still a student. And as far as React goes, I've practiced React for about 3 years now. Still continue to do so. And yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I really hope to encourage you all to enjoy it just as much as I do. So, all right, so let's move on. What is React? Plain and simple, says it on the website. React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces, and that's really the meat and potatoes to it. Here at the bottom, you can see ReactJS.org and beta.reactjs.org. Actually, I'm going to show you these two websites. These are their official websites. These kind of talk about React's kind of briefing material, overview material. They got some examples with some interactive demos and things like that. So if outside of this course, you're interested in learning even more about React, you have React.js, their official website, to look into and kind of dive into. They have some tutorials and things like that you can check out. And there's also, they're working on a brand new version of their documentation called, that's currently under beta.reactjs.org, that you can check out some more updated tutorials and things like that. So something to check out if you're interested in learning even more. But a couple fun facts about React.js. It was initially released in May of 2013, so it's getting a bit up there in the age department. It was developed and currently maintained by Facebook/Meta, however you identify them. It's still open source and is still actively worked on. So we're coming up on React version 18, a lot of cool improvements coming up in that version. And it's widely used. It's used by a lot of people. So companies that use React is Facebook, of course, Reddit, Netflix, Discord even, and a whole lot more. So very popular framework. I mean, Facebook, the whole reason React exists in the first place was Facebook needed a better way to help solve their problems on Facebook.com. So they came up with React. And so they were nice enough to share it to the development community so that we could all benefit from the framework. So that's why we have it today. So yeah, React, if you check out the Stack Overflow developer survey from 2020, React was actually the second most loved web framework in 2020. 2021 stats, I think, came out like a couple days ago. I didn't update this slide to reflect that, but if I had to guess, it's probably also number 2 above Angular and below jQuery. jQuery is still dominating the force. So yeah, pretty much the lowdown is used by a lot of companies, a lot of big companies. So, you know, you have these applications that are huge, Netflix, Facebook, these are huge applications that are all relying on React to help, you know, give their users a nice experience. So definitely definitely a solid framework in that regard. Has huge community support. It works really well with like third-party stuff. So it's really easy to hook into. And you'll even see other React frameworks. So React is a web framework. You'll even see frameworks built specifically for React. So it's really easy to plug into. It's one of the most loved frameworks, like we said, and it's a very attractive skill. If you are someone who's just graduated from college, trying to get an internship or something like that, saying that you know React on a resume is going to put you ahead of someone who probably doesn't necessarily know what React is. Because it's a very valuable skill. A lot of companies use it. I've used it. I've been at 2 companies so far, and I use it extensively in both. So, and these are smaller companies too. So not only do the big companies use it, some of the smaller ones do as well. So with all that being said, hopefully I've convinced you that React is worth learning and worth investing some time into. So let's learn some. Let's learn some React. Yeah, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to use a online editor called codesandbox. I'll copy and paste the link in the chat for people to use. So if you all want to go to that URL, codesandbox.io, and we want to sign up using your GitHub account. So when you go to codesandbox, I may have to do this in a private window. Yeah, I do. So let me do that real quick. Codesandbox.io. You're going to be taken to their homepage. And you just want to click, I believe, the sign in button, and then you can choose sign in with GitHub. So this is where that GitHub piece comes into play, like I talked about earlier. Just sign in with your GitHub account. And then once you do that, sit tight, because I'm going to share some starter code with you all. So I'll give a couple minutes for people to go through that and get signed up with codesandbox. So once you've signed up, once you've signed into codesandbox and your account is good to go, I've posted another link in the chat, which is pointing to this starter repo. So once you get signed in, open this bad boy and your screen should look very similar to mine. And then you can just hang out. Actually, it looks like we have 3 people in the waiting room. Do we want to let them in, or is that just a bug on my end? Okay, sorry about that. Yeah. For those of you who just joined, welcome. You're not too late. I've posted 2 links in the chat. I can repost those if you need to, or one of our lovely TAs can forward those to you as well. We're going to codesandbox.io, signing up using our GitHub accounts, and then we're also going to the starter repo URL that I shared. I'll reshare those now, just so that you have them just in case, because Zoom do be like that. Codesandbox. So you can go to codesandbox, sign up using your GitHub account. And then once you've done that, that did not copy at all. Very nice. Once you've done that, you can go to the starter repo and your screen should look very similar to mine. And then TAs for new people joining, if you could just forward those details along, that would be very helpful so that we can get started. All right, so I'm going to, if you haven't got it quite set up yet, feel free to put it in the chat or message a TA directly if you're having issues getting signed up or anything like that. But we're gonna move on slightly. So now that you have your screen pulled up, it looks very similar to mine. You may, or you should see a button in the top right corner of the window that says fork. So you have these array of buttons. Your probably picture, share, fork, and create sandbox. If you just click the button that says fork, what that's going to do is it's going to create a copy of this code sandbox, this starter repo, and it's going to make a new version under your account. So yeah, this just pretty much takes all that code and pretty much just saves a copy under your account so that you can edit it and make all your changes and do all the things for the workshop. So you'll note it's forked. When you look up at the top, it's going to say GWC React Portfolio Workshop Starter Forked. So it'll say forked in parentheses in the name, and you should get a little toast that shows up in the bottom right-hand corner as well. So you'll definitely want to make sure you do that so that this can be saved on your account. Cool. Okay. So if you don't see the option for fork, this is actually has happened before. If you could just go to open up the source directory. Here, I'll open the link. So if we open the link, wow, thanks for not going to the URL. All right, if we go to the link and codesandbox doesn't want to show us the fork button, you should see this like index.jsx file showing up here. You can just make a change. So if we change like root, if we just make this like single quotes or, you know, something, some minor change like that and hit save, or maybe it didn't. Let's see, let's get rid of, I don't know, you can just delete a line. So just make some type of change and then hit save. And then that should fork the repo automatically. And it should say forked in the title and give you a little toast and everything. So if you make a change and hit save, because you're not me, it should fork it. I don't know why the fork button doesn't show up. That seems like a bug, but. And if that doesn't work, please let me know. Oh, you see it now. Okay, sweet. Glad that works. Still don't see it. Did you make a change and then hit save? Like remove something, hit save and things like that. It should say forked in the title. If it says forked in the title, you don't have to worry about the button showing up or anything. Oh, you don't have that index. In that case, just look in the source folder. And then inside that source folder is index.jsx, and you can open that. You can just change something in there. All right, so if it doesn't say forked quite yet, as long as you're signed in, right, you should see your name in the top left, little avatar, some form or fashion like that. It will probably fork as we're working on everything, so don't worry about it too much. If you do run into issues at any point, feel free to reach out to a TA, and they'll be happy to help. Otherwise, we're just gonna dive in. So now we have our forked repository. I'll give you a brief explanation of codesandbox if you've never seen it before. This is an online code editor. So we don't have to install React. We don't have to install any dependencies or anything like that on our home systems. Everything is just done for us in the browser. So nice, making it so easy to work on things like this. So as you can see on the left, or on the very left-hand side, we have this sidebar where we can view all of our files. Next to that, we have our code editor, which has like autocomplete and everything like that, text highlighting, great stuff. And then further to the right of that, we have the actual content browser window. So every time that we make a change to our code, it's going to be immediately reflected in that window on the right. So it's really easy to just like get started with React and kind of see how your changes affect the output. So yeah, that's codesandbox, really useful. I use it for a lot of projects, even professionally. Really good for proof of concept work and just getting something up and running. And you can even like share with people, so you can all be working on the same codesandbox and things like that. So very cool platform. So I'm going to talk briefly about the file structure that we have here. If you look on the left under files, we have this first folder for public. This just says some of our assets that we'll be using throughout the workshop. We have our base index.html file that we'll need. We'll notice a folder called snippets. We'll use this throughout the workshop. This just has some code that it really isn't important to learning JavaScript. React. It's not really important to learning React, but we still are going to need it to get the final product. So I'll ask you to like go into snippets, go to the home snippet and like copy and paste this in a specific place. So just keep that in mind that we'll need to do that a couple places throughout the workshop. There's another folder called solutions, and this is the final solution for every single file that we're going to go through this workshop. So for whatever reason, you fall behind, you run into an issue, or maybe you have to drop off early or anything like that, all the solutions are here in these files under the solutions folder, so that you can get caught up or still get the final product, even if you can't stay the entire time. But you won't actually need it for the workshop. I'm going to be walking through a lot of this with everyone, make sure we're all on the same page. And if you ever have any questions, you'll be able to ask and things like that. And then finally, we have our source directory, where this is where all our code is going to live. So we have like CSS files, JSX files, more directories, so more JSX, CSS files, and a folder called components. And I'll come back to all of this here in just a second. But this is where we're going to write all of our code. This is where all of the magic happens in React, is inside of this source folder. So this is where we're going to be working. All right, so we have all of this structure built out. We have all these files and we got our code sandbox written and everything. So what are we going to be building? Well, we're going to be building a portfolio website that's, yeah, it may have been shared, you may have seen it. This may be the first time you've seen it, but this is what we're going to be building today. So we have a nice little app bar. It's going to have our name, of course, in the top left. We're going to have some links for navigation in the top right. All of them are nice purple app bar. A nice header, just, our name, say hello. A nice about me section with a nice styled header. Nice illustration to welcome everyone to our page. A project section so that you can show off some of the projects that you've made in these nice little cards. So you can have like the name of your project, brief description of the project, and even like a thumbnail or an image. We're going to be using placeholders, but that's something you can do. And we're going to be doing some, we're going to add some accordions. So these things, ideally you click like this little header, this little tab, and it's going to expand and show like the content. So like you can say, oh, this is all the experience I have. Like I went to this super cool React workshop, right? And if people want to learn more, they can just click the header, it'll expand, and then you can kind of explain in detail like all the things that you learned and all the cool things, and like maybe a link to like your final product and things like that. So that's going to be an accordion. So quite a few different components that we're going to have to write, or that we're going to get to write throughout this workshop. But this is essentially the final product, and we'll reference this design multiple times throughout the workshop, just to make sure that we have everything lining up just nicely. So now that we know what we're going to build, it's time to get started. So we're actually going to get started in our app.jsx file. But before I start jumping in, I just want to say, if you do at some point have a question, or you run into any issues or like that, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. And then whenever I reach a good stopping point or finishing my point, I'll take a break and answer any questions, allow you to ask your question and things like that, kind of go over things. So I'll definitely leave some time for you to ask questions and get help with stuff. So don't worry too much about that. But yeah, let's get started, shall we? So app.jsx inside source, inside the app folder, inside of our app.jsx file, we have our kind of backbone. This is kind of like our main component for all of our content that's going to live. So as you can see, we have this text that says we need content. And you see that's all we've rendered to the page is we need content. So you can actually change this. Maybe we really need content, right? And you can see that that's updated in the browser, all done in real time. So let's do what it says. We need to add some content. So let's start at the top of the page and let's start with our app bar. So we have this nice purple background that kind of goes the width of the page. We have our name and some little links. So I think that's a pretty good place to start. So we're going to jump over here to the components folder, expand that. There should be a folder called app bar. And then underneath app bar, we should have appbar.jsx. So inside of our appbar.jsx, got a few comments. Yeah, let's get started. We're going to need that purple background, our name aligned to the left, and our 3 links for navigation. A lot of the code that we're going to be writing in here is going to look just like HTML. It's actually not HTML. It's actually something called JSX. JSX is kind of like syntactic sugar that just makes your life as a developer much easier because it looks a lot like HTML and you can almost treat it exactly like it. But it just makes it easier as a developer to build really accessible websites. And it's really a lot easier to pick up if you already know HTML and you kind of learn both at the same time. Almost. They're not quite the same. There are some differences, but it's mostly going to look very familiar if you know HTML. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get started trying to build out our app bar, just like the design. So let's get started. So I'm going to get rid of all these comments. And so the first thing that we're going to want to do is add our header here. So header is just like an HTML tag for accessibility. It's just, this is the thing at the top of the page. It looks like a header. So we call it a header. And you're going to want to add a header in between the open, greater than and less than signs, as well as inside that closing tag. And then let's just start off simple. Let's just add our name. Obviously, you can put your name. You don't have to put mine. I'm going to hit save and nothing. Is the screen glitching? Is it very distracting? I can try and fix that somehow. Let's try. I don't really know how to fix that actually. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So let me just try closing a few things. And see if that helps. Because I know I have quite a few things open, so I want to make sure it's not too bad. I'll keep going, and if it stays bad, then let me know, and we can try something else. Otherwise, let's continue. So we have our header here, and we're just going to add our name. I hit save, but it doesn't really look like any of our content is showing up. Nothing actually changed on the right-hand side. So let's go back to our app.jsx. I know this is where all the content is rendered, but we don't see our content. So I believe, oh yes, we actually need to add our app bar. So you may have noticed that this is a function. This app bar is just a function that we're exporting from this file. So, methods, right? You can export those and reuse them in different places. Well, in React, when we export functions, we can render those to the screen. So we're going to get rid of our we need content section, and we're just going to add our app bar. So we're going to do a less than sign app bar and then self-closing. And I'll kind of space this out to make it look a little bit nicer. So all we did is we took our app bar that we're importing here at the top and adding it with that less than sign app bar and then this / greater than sign. And now when we hit save, we should see that we have a nice purple block with our name inside of it. Right? So make sure app.bar.jsx is saved with our header tag. And then in app.jsx, we are rendering, or we are adding that app bar inside this return statement. So screen should look just like mine. And you should see, yeah, that purple section there. All right, and so this doesn't quite look like the design yet, so let's keep going. We definitely are going to want our name. We're going to want that kind of to the left, right? We want that to like the left hand side. It looks like it's bolded as well, so we'll definitely want to take care of that. And we'll do that by just adding a nice little div here. So less than div, and then a closing tag for our div, just like that. And then we're going to take our name, we're going to copy that, paste that in between that div. And we're actually going to give this div a class name. This is going to be camel case. So class name of header contents. And I'm going to hit save on that. That's looking slightly better. So all we did was add a div, gave it a class name of header content, and put our name inside that div. It looks like it's not quite as hugging this wall anymore. It's still not bolded though. So we can actually check out, we see we've imported this app.bar.css. We can actually open that up to see all the styles that Past Matt has previously set up for us. Thanks, Past Matt. So we have our header content. That's what we just added, that class name. That's class name of header content. These styles are being applied to that div. And it looks like we have a header name class as well. So we can include that. So inside of our div here, I'm going to add a span tag on either side. So we're going to have a span tag, and then our name is going to be in between those two span tags, open and closing. And then we're going to add a class name to this one for header name. Hit save on that, and boom, our name gets bigger, it gets bolded, and that is looking much better, much more like the design. So we have our name. The next thing we need to do, right, if we take a look at the Figma here, is that we have our navigation links over here on the right side of the container. So we have about, projects, and experience. So we're going to want to add those. And I'm still checking. All right, so we're going to add our navigation links. We're going to add a nice little container. So another div, we'll close that off. Sure. And we'll give that just a second. Anyways, so let's continue, unless anyone has anything. We're going to finish up this component, and then we'll pause again for questions and make sure everyone is on the same page. But let's finish our header. Quick reminder, what we're making. We just want to add these links to this about, projects, and experience section. We're going to want to get those rendered. So we're going to add our div here, just like we did, and add a class name of nav links. And we can see, if we save that, you can see in our app.bar.css, we have that nav links class. We're just applying that to that div. And then inside of this div, we're going to have 3 anchor tags. So anchor tags are just like ways to render links to the page. So we're going to have an about. I'm actually just going to copy this and paste it 2 more times. We're going to have an about, a projects, and experience. So that should be what the Figma says. Yeah, about, projects, and experience. Those are our 3 A tags. And if we save, look over here on the right, we have our 3 links, and those are looking pretty snazzy. And we're getting like these green squiggles. The href attribute is required. Yes, it is indeed. So we're going to want to add that href attribute. And we're just going to say, we're going to do the pound or the hashtag symbol and call that home. And then that's for the about one. And then for projects, we're just going to say href equals the pound sign once again, projects. And then for experience, similarly named experience. So with the pound sign, very important. So in HTML or normal HTML, when you do a pound symbol like this, or a hash as it's actually called, if you have an element that has an ID, so like if we were to give this div like an ID of like fun, right? If I navigate to a hash of like fun, it'll automatically scroll the page to that div, right? So we're actually just setting this up for some more content that we'll have later on, so that when we click these links, it's going to scroll us to that section just by clicking on the links. So that's why there's this hash symbol. And that'll probably make a little bit more sense. That'll probably click once we actually implement those things and we see it in action. But yeah, that's our app bar. That's all it is to it. We have our header, we have our name and the links, and I would say that looks just like our design. So yeah, I think that is a great first step. We have our app bar rendered inside of our app file. And yeah, I'm gonna pause there, see if anyone has any questions or need any help or anything like that. Take a sip of water. All right, well, if anyone has any questions, we'll keep moving along here. So that's it for our app bar. So our app bar.jsx. So notice that here in our app, like I said, this is the backbone of our application. We took all of that code that's in this app bar.jsx file, right? It's just in a single function. And all of that code that we have written here, we're just slapping right here in our app file, right? So we're essentially, we're extracting the code. So essentially we can take all of this same code, right? And this is just for demonstration, you don't have to do this, but we can just take all that same code and paste it here, and notice that we actually get the exact same result. So it's actually the exact same. All we're doing is taking all of this code that we could have in our app and just putting it into its own component inside of something, that's named accordingly, and just saying app bar, right? We're just replacing all of that code with essentially just calling a function, right? So you can think of rendering it in this like tag HTML looking thing. We're essentially just calling this function, and this element is getting replaced by all of this code, right? And if you think about it, that's the whole benefits of like methods and functions, is that you can take code that is maybe really long, really messy, or maybe you reuse it a couple times throughout your application. You can take all of that code, put it in a method, and then just call the method, right? And then you can call that method whenever you need it and not have to duplicate code. Because in HTML, right, you don't have that luxury. If you need like 3 of the same thing that all looks and acts the same, you have to copy and paste all of that HTML 3 different times. In React, we don't have to do that. So a huge benefit of React, big time saver. And as you'll see, it actually comes in handy when you need to use multiple of the same component. So let's move on. We're done with our app bar inside of app.jsx. So here we're actually going to be using our very first snippet. So if we go back to this snippets folder that I mentioned earlier, you'll see there's one that says a.home.mdx. go ahead and open that one. It should have this like main tag ID equals home. You can just Control A or Command A if Mac is your thing, and then Control/Command C to copy all of that content, or right click copy. We're going to go back into our app.jsx file, and right below our app bar, just right below that and above this like closing tag, we're just going to paste all that code in and hit save. So take all of this code that's in a.home.mdx in our snippets folder and pasting that right below our app bar in app.jsx. So when you hit save, we actually get our nice header here, some lorem ipsum text, and our nice little graphic. So take a look at the Figma. We have our header. We have our kind of like about me section, right, which is just a lorem ipsum text that we're using right now as a placeholder. And we have our nice little illustration. So that is looking pretty good. It does look like we're missing something though. If we look at our Figma, this about me header, this purple kind of like underlined looking header is actually missing. Look at our comment here. It actually says, yeah, you're missing this thing. We need a section heading. Or it says we'll actually need a few of them, right? Because throughout our design, we actually use like projects, experience. These things, they all look the exact same. They have different text content, but they all look pretty much the same. So, and just to make things reusable, make things kind of put it all into one place, I think this is a really good candidate for a component. So let's make a heading component with all of those styles that make sure it all looks consistent. So if we look in our components folder, there is a folder called heading, and we can go to heading.jsx. And this will be our heading component. So this is going to be this about me header, this project header. That's what that's going to be. So the thing is, right, when you think about functions, right, it's not all the time where you have a function that just takes no parameters and you can really reuse it. A lot of times your functions or your methods are going to take like a couple parameters so that they can be a bit more dynamic and a bit easier to reuse, right? So if I have, for example, like if I have a function that's like print, right? I don't want to write a function that just like console.log, like hello world, right? Like I don't want to have to write a function called print hello world, and then when I want to print something else, I don't want to write another function that says, print hello, right? Obviously, you don't want to do that. All you have to do is just say, hey, this function actually takes a parameter. So we can say like text, right? And so now instead of saying print hello world, we can just say print whatever the text is. So whatever you pass into this function, we're going to use that to print. And now this function is so much more easy to reuse, right? That's just the beauty of methods, right? Is being able to reuse them like passing parameters. Well, great news, in React, we can do exactly the same thing. We actually call them props though, or it's just short for properties. We can actually pass props into components to make them reusable in the exact same way. So here, in this little comment that says we need some props inside of this heading, opening, closing of our function, props are actually passed in as an object. So you can pass as many as you need. They're all going to get passed in as a single object called props. A little comment right here says, here's the props that we're actually going to need. So what we can do is instead of just saying props here, we can put the open, close curly braces and then say, okay, we're going to need ID and we're going to need children. So this comment says, here's the props we'll need, ID and children. And we can just say, hey, you're going to pass us an object, and this object is going to have ID and it's going to have children. And we're going to use those to render our component. So one thing that we can do is that we can say, I don't really care about props right now, right? All I care about is my about me showing up. I just want, that's all I want, is my about me to show up. So we can get rid of our comment here. And let's write our JSX. So we can say this is an H2. So H2 is just like a heading or like a bolded header that kind of says, hey, this is a new section. So we're going to use an H2 so that, is accessible. And then inside of our H2, we're going to have a span that says about me. When we save that, again, nothing happens. Oh, that's right. We actually need to include our component where we want to use it. So we're going to say heading, right? Just like we did with the app bar, where we have this less than sign, the name of the component, which in this case is heading. That's the function we're exporting. And then this closing bit of it. And now when we hit save, we'll see our about me section. So going back to the heading, JSX, like this structure, this structure is very simple, H2 and a span. And all we do is we just render it to the page like this. And there we get our about me section. All the styling is handled for us in this heading.css file. It does some H2 span CSS magic for us to make sure that's all nice and styled. Thank you, Past Matt, for doing that for us. So yeah, so this works, right? We have our about me section. It matches the design, right? Just wipe our hands clean, ship it, move on to the next feature, right? Well, we know a bit better, right? We know, okay, we're gonna need more than one of these. We're gonna have projects and experience, right? So we need to make this more dynamic. So going back to my spiel before of, we can pass in props to make our functions more reusable. We can say, hey, instead of saying, just render about me, we can do an open and closing curly brace in between our span here. And this takes us kind of out of HTML land and back into JavaScript land. So I can actually put JavaScript in between these curly braces and say like, oh, I want to render children here. Whatever you pass as children to this component, we're going to render in this span. So we're saying whatever the value of this field is, we're just going to render it to the page. And children is actually a special prop in that when we go back to our heading here, we actually need to use this. We can say children equals about me. So if we save both of those files, you can see that nothing's changed. We now see about me. If I get rid of this, right, it goes away because heading is taking this children prop and rendering that to the page. So we need it. If we don't provide it, it doesn't have anything to render. So we need to do that. But children, right, you can just add it as like an attribute to the tag, just like this. But children is actually a special prop in React. We actually don't need to do this way, and you'll typically never see it this way, really. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to make this like a full tag, complete, just like you would like a div, right? You have a starting tag and an ending tag, and everything in between here is our children. Okay, so now we can say about me in between our opening and closing heading tag, hit save, and our about me section is back. So everything that's in between this opening and closing, that's our children. And that's getting passed in as our children property here, and we're rendering it inside of that span. So I can then make this say, whatever I want about me, the sequel, whatever, right? Whatever we put there, it's going to get rendered to the page. So to match the design, we're just going to say about me, and that is looking pretty good. By the way, feel free to edit this to put your own name. Obviously, not everyone is named Matt, though it's a pretty super cool name. Feel free to change this to whatever your name is. And then we just have some nice placeholder text there. And that's it. Oh, one last thing, almost forgot. Before in our app bar, remember I said that we have these hrefs with these like pound or like hashtag looking things. This is where that's actually important, because now we're going to take this ID prop and just say ID. So the ID of our H2, we're just going to directly assign to it. So now that we can say in our app.jsx, we can pass in that ID prop and say, I think we call this one home. So yeah, we can just call an ID, this heading, this about me section. It doesn't match up exactly, but yeah, an ID of home. So now that theoretically, when we get more content, whenever we click the about page, it's going to take us, it's going to scroll us to this section right here. So we passed in this prop called ID, and we're just assigning that to the ID of our H2 tag. All right, so that's our heading component. This is props. You've learned props. A huge part of React is understanding props, how to leverage them in a way to make components reusable and really elevate like the developer experience of your application, right? The better you can make things reusable while still making sense, right? Props is huge in helping with that. And you've learned children, which is a special prop in React. That's great. And just being able to use props is a huge step forward. So I'm going to take a pause here, see if anyone has any questions, or make sure everyone's caught up and see how everyone's doing. Feel free to unmute or just type in chat to make sure we're all on the same page. And if anyone has any questions, let me know. And if I need to switch to a different file, let me know as well. And I'll share my screen. Also, please remember that the solutions folder exists so that if you need to look at that, yep, I can share the app.js text file for sure. Yep, no problem. Oops, sorry. I was going to try and split it, but it didn't want me to. Yeah, no problem. The solutions folder is there with all of this same code. So if you ever need that as well, that's there for you in case you fall behind. I will try and slow down a little bit. Sorry, I just get too excited when I'm explaining this stuff. And it makes me talk fast. So I'll try and slow down a little bit. And if there's anything I need to clarify, just please let me know. All right. I wish it was easier to see reaction. I think it's saying open participants. If you are, let's see, if anyone, or if you're all good to go, can you use a reaction and give me like a thumbs up? If not, if you're still working on something, that's perfectly fine. Let's just try and see how everyone's doing. Make sure everyone is caught up. You just give me a thumbs up reaction if you are ready to move on. So all the styling that's done for this app, I did beforehand. Past Matt, like I said, who's really helping us out with the CSS. CSS is just normal CSS. It actually doesn't change when you get into React. It's all pretty much used the exact same way. You have to import the CSS file, but then you can just use class names, IDs. The CSS you write is exactly the same. So I didn't want to focus on that in this workshop because that's not React, right? This is the intro to React. I wanted to focus on the different React pieces like props, components, you know, functions and things like that. So if you are interested in like the CSS and stuff like that, that's, you know, definitely there for you to change, you know, play around with, see what happens when things change. Some of the colors maybe. I think I'm using CSS variables for some of the colors and things like that. So if you wanted to try a different color scheme or something like that, you can play around with the CSS in that regard. And yeah, Ashley, like Ashley said in the chat, we'll have a social event so that we can work on styling, content changes, and things like that. So that'll be a good time. Nice little teaser. Yeah, yeah, so CSS is exactly the same. And that's why you'll see like these different class names. And it's like, where did you get the class names from? It's like, I've already written it, because CSS is, although CSS can be very handy, can be very unwieldy in some cases. So definitely something I wanted to get done beforehand. All right. I think probably just stop for another minute or so, right? And then we'll probably get moving on, if that's okay. And if you haven't, like I said, if we get started and you still haven't caught up, that's perfectly fine. The solutions folder is there to help you with that. The solutions folder, yeah, it does have app. So feel free to leverage the solutions if you feel like you're getting a little bit behind. I'm going to try and slow down and talk a little bit slower and kind of be more methodical while I'm filling things out, so that it's a little bit easier to kind of keep up. So I apologize for that, but I will try. All right, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started back again here. So here's how our site is looking right now. And if we take a look at our Figma design, that's looking pretty close. Our about me / landing / navigation section, like, I don't know, if you ask me, that's looking pretty spot on. That is looking pretty good, other than the content, but we'll have plenty of time to fill out that content later. So it's time to move on to our next section. It looks like we have this project section. So we have our project's header. We have this nice little blue, kind of light blue box in the background to help separate some content. We have a card with a title, a description, and even a thumbnail. Looks like we're going to be using a placeholder for this case, but notice how each project card is pretty much the same. It's supposed to look the exact same, right? Consistency in the design. But there's some content differences. So you obviously expect the titles to be different, descriptions, even the thumbnails. So you have this one thing, right, that looks consistent, just with slightly different content. A great candidate for a component, right? We just make something like a project card component. We just specify what we want the title, description, and image to be, and we just have 3 of those project cards. And ideally, we just have one component and it just shows up 3 different times. So I think that's going to be a great candidate for a component for us. So let's see if we can go ahead and implement that. We're going to leverage our snippets folder once again. We go into the snippets folder here. There's a b.projects.mdx. This nice little section tag here, we're going to select all of that, copy it. So copy all of that code that's in there. We're going to go back to our app.jsx file, and then in between this section and main tag, so at the end of our section here and right before that main closing tag, so right here, we're going to paste all of that content and hit save. I'll pause for a second. So this is going to take all of that code that was in b.projects.mdx in our snippets folder. And this is kind of just like making sure we get our blue box onto the page, and then our kind of container for our project cards, where we're going to put everything. So this just kind of helps lay some of the groundwork for us, so that we don't have to worry about it. And then if we take a look at the Figma design, we need one of our headers that we just wrote, our headings. And this one needs to say projects. So see, we have a nice little comment here reminding us saying, hey, we're going to need one of our headings for this new section. So right where that comment is, I'm just going to add a heading, just like we did for that About Me section up here. Just going to add a heading with the less than sign, and then a closing tag as well. Again, just like how we did for the About Me section, this one is going to say projects. And then we'll want to make sure we give an ID for this one as well. This one is going to be projects, right? So This ID needs to align with those A tags, those anchor tags that we wrote in our app bar earlier. So this ID of projects should match the hash value that we had in the app bar. So we'll save that, and yeah, our nice little project header shows up. How nice, because we made heading a component, boom, it's just that easy to add a new heading that looks the exact same as the last one to our project. Minimal effort, minimal work. So we can delete that comment. That was such a helpful reminder. Thanks, Past Matt, for reminding us to do that. And then we're going to want to implement our project cards. So take another look at the design. Nice white box with just like a header, little description text, and an image. So make sure our app.jsx file is saved. And then if we navigate to our components folder, whoops, I did not mean to drag that. If we navigate to our components folder, we should have a folder that says project card. So source, components, and then project card. And we're going to open our project card.jsx. And so here, we're just going to implement that project card that just like you saw in the design. A couple comments at the top of this file. We have the props that we'll need. So just like we used in our heading component, we're going to leverage props, right? Because we're going to have 3 different project cards. They all should look the same except for the content. And because we're going to want the content to look different for each one, we're going to leverage props to help with that. So we're going to use props to help dynamically fill in that content. So we're going to accept a title, which is going to be just like that title section of that project card, the description, the small text right underneath that, and then image source. So this is going to be the route to the image that we'll use for like the thumbnail of the project card. So we're actually going to kind of do what we did with the heading. We're going to just initially hard code everything inside of our component to just get the first one on the page. So we're going to delete our comment here inside the main part. And like I said, we're just going to do the first one. And so we're going to need our white box. So we can do that by adding a div as our first element. And then we're just going to add a class name of card container. We're going to do that in camel case. So delete our comment and just add a nice little div with a very simple class name of card container. If we save that, yeah, nothing really shows up on the page quite yet. We're going to want to add some more content before then. So in between our div, we're going to want that title section, so that bolded section at the top of our card. So we're going to actually use an h3 tag to do that. So create a little h3 tag, open and closing, just like our div and other HTML tags. And in between there, just the name of our title card. I think I just called it project 1. Just a nice little placeholder that we'll be using for now. Like I said, we're going to hard code first, and then we can make it reusable later. I really expected something to show up on the screen. So we're going to go back to our app.jsx folder real quick. Oh, that's right. We actually need to add our project card to our app.jsx, just like we did our app bar heading, right? These components that we're writing to be nice and reusable, we actually need to add them to our app.jsx so that they get rendered to the page. So when we do that, in between our project cards div that we just pasted in not too long ago, we had a nice big comment here kind of explaining that we needed to add our project cards. Got rid of that big comment and just added our project card tag right in between that div. So now we can see that we get our nice white box with project 1 at the top. And I will open both of these up. So project cards on the top, and app.jsx is down here at the bottom if you need to reference either of those. That's what we have so far. I'll take a pause, drink some water. So yeah, that's all we have so far. We just rendered a single project card, and that project card, we only have our title, which is project 1. So we're going to take another quick look at the Figma. We can see we have a description text and then our thumbnail right below that. So let's go ahead and add those. So right below our H3, we're going to add a P tag. So P, you can think of as like the paragraph tag. Just some nice simple text that we want to add. And this is like a brief description. So whatever text content we want inside of our P tag, we can just add in between here. So like a brief description of project 1, proper punctuation. We'll hit save. We'll see our description shows up on the page. That's looking quite like the design. Very nice. So have our placeholder text there. And then the last thing is our image, so our thumbnail. So we'll have an image tag at img, this image tag. So this is how we render like SVGs, PNGs, JPEGs, things like that. We'll add a source as a source attribute. And this is just going to point to the URL for our image. If you scroll up just a little bit, you'll see that we have image source and then a default value. And it's like this /assets/project placeholder.svg. You can actually just copy that value. And then inside these 2 double quotes, we can just paste that right into there. Then when we hit save, we have I'm a placeholder. Then that appears in our project card. And now that's looking pretty good. That's looking just like our design. A solid first step. You'll notice we have this big green squiggle. It says image elements must have an alt prop. And as codesandbox just doing God's work of reminding us that we want to write accessible applications. So we want to give this some type of alt tag. So if an image, so say for whatever reason, this image that we're addressing here can't load, doesn't exist anymore, or just fails, we want to provide some type of alt text that will show up in place of this image if for whatever reason it doesn't load. So we'll say alt project 1, like, thumbnail, or just project 1 would probably be good enough. So for whatever reason that image doesn't load, we can just say, hey, this is supposed to be an image of project 1. And that gets rid of our nice red squiggle. And I'll scroll over just in case you need to see that URL. Again, is up here in the comments as well. And yeah, we should have a nice little project card just like that. I'll pause for another second. So we have our div, which kind of did like the big white box for us with the nice rounded corners, a nice box shadow to match the design. We then did an H3 or a heading tag just to give it like a title, to give our project a title. And then underneath that, just a nice brief description using our P tag, and then adding our thumbnail or as like an image. So if we had like a thumbnail that we wanted to add for a specific project, we could add that. But since we're just kind of roughing stuff out, we're just adding a nice little placeholder that we have set up. So now that we've got that implemented, if we go back to our app.jsx file, we can see we're rendering 1 project card here. But what we can do is we can actually render more than 1. We can actually render onto the page more than 1 project card. So the design, if you remember, it calls for 3 of them. So we have project 1, 2, and 3. We need 3 of these cards. So if we want to render 3 project cards, we just copy and paste our project card 2 more times, just like that. So one on top of the other. And when we hit save, we now have 3 project cards. So Now our project card, built to be reusable. All we got to do is copy and paste, and we have it 3 different times. Very nice. However, it's not very typical that you're going to have the same project 3 different times on your page, right? You would expect that each project card is going to have slightly different content, like we said. So project 1, maybe project 2, then project 3, right? So if you recall in heading, right, we did a very similar thing where we kind of took that props object and we said, I'll actually open it, heading, right? We took our props and we used those props to help drive the content of our component. My challenge to you, we'll just give this a few minutes for those of you who just want to give it a shot. We've hard-coded this component to just always say project 1, a brief description of project 1. I've kind of given a hint in these comments as to what your props might be. Don't worry too much about this default value. You can just use this source, but try and implement these props to drive our content, just like we did with heading. So I'm going to take a step back, give like 5 to 10 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, something like that. Give you all a chance to take a crack at this on your own. And yeah, so essentially, right now, you notice how everything says project 1, everything says the exact same thing. My challenge to you is to refactor this component so that it leverages props, just like we did in heading.jsx, to dynamically display this content, just like we did with heading. Does that make sense? Does what I'm asking make sense? We're going to give you some time to try and implement this on your own. If you have questions, if you are very stuck and not sure where to start, please let us know in the chat or by unmuting. Otherwise, go for it. And don't worry if you can't figure it out, because I'm going to run through this all as a group at the end. So at the end of the 5 or 7 minutes, I'm going to myself run through this. So if it doesn't make sense right now, or if you just don't quite figure it out yet, don't worry, we're going to run through this together. So I'm going to pause for just a few minutes so that you can take a crack at that. And yeah, let us know if you have any issues. All right, so let's run through this. If you got it, great. If you got it working, that's awesome. If you didn't, that's perfectly fine. We're going to run through this, and if it doesn't make sense, feel free to ask questions. But let's tackle this. So props that we'll need. Nice little helping comment here for us. So just like in heading, we have this side of our function here. It takes a single parameter called props, which is just an object that contains all of the props that we're passing in. So what we can do is, just like in heading, open, close curly braces and kind of destructure all of those properties from our object. So we can say title, description, and image source. So I got those directly from the props we'll need comment right there. So we'll have those 3 things to help drive our content. So title, well, we can replace this project 1. Instead of saying project 1 here in between our H3 tag, we can replace that with our open close curly brace and then title. So whatever the value of title is just going to what's going to be rendered in this H3 tag. So same kind of thing for description. You can get rid of all of that content and replace that with open close curly brace and then description. So this value into that p tag. So whatever description is going to get rendered in that p tag. And then finally, for our image tag, we can replace this source. We can actually pass a prop to that as well, our image source. And then for our alt tag, we can just have that say title. So we use our title in our H3 tag, our description and our p tag, and our image source with our image tag. So now we've made kind of refactor this component. So now all that hard-coded stuff that we had is now gone, and it's going to be completely dependent on whatever content that we pass it. We hit save right now, everything's gone. What are these lines? Everything's empty. And that's obviously not what we want. We want it to match the design. So we'll pull up our app.jsx here. We'll keep our project card up at the top there. Let's scroll down to our project card. So we have the project card 3 different times, right? And we've refactored our project card to leverage props for its content. And right now we're not passing these props to these project cards, right? There's no fields here. We're not passing anything to it. So there's nothing for it to render. So in order to get stuff to render, we just need to say, hey, on this first project card tag, we need to add our title, which in this case is going to be project 1. And as you can see, we have our title. It shows back up. And you can even see our alt text that shows up where our image is supposed to be. So we just need to do this for each one of our project cards. We just need to add our title. We need to add our description. So a brief description of project 1. Right, and now our description text is now back for our first one. And then the last prop we need to add is our image source, which is actually going to be that same path that we added before, that assets project placeholder.svg. So this /assets/project placeholder svg. If you remember back in the very beginning of this workshop, I mentioned this public folder where the assets folder lives. Inside this assets folder, you'll notice that's where our project_placeholder is. So when we're saying /assets, we're actually directly referencing this assets folder here inside of our public folder. So /assets is this guy, and then /project placeholder.svg. We can directly reference those and pull the images straight from that public folder. So that's where that's actually coming from. So now that we've added our 3 props for our first project card, right, we can see that it actually, outside of like the sizing issues that we have, all the content is there just like it was before, and it's only the first one. And we can then add these same props to the other 2 cards so that we can get their content rendered just the same way. So we can just knock that out real quick. On our second project card here, we know obviously we want to add our title of project 2. And then our description, which is going to be a brief. Feel free to copy and paste this if that's going to be much easier. It's going to be pretty much the same, except for changing everything to be project 2 instead of project 1. So a brief description, project 2. And then we're going to have an image source be the exact same thing that was before, that /assets/project placeholder. So if I save, that actually reformats for me. As you can see, actually everything is pretty much the same except for project 2. And then, if it wasn't tedious enough, we have one more project card to do. Title, project 3, and then a description of a brief description of project 3, and an image source of the exact same URL. And that I just copied and pasted that /assets/project placeholder just to save some time. And there are our project cards. So we have our 3 components of each one, project 1, 2, 3, with their own descriptions, right? And ideally in a real portfolio, you're going to have much different content in each of these, right? One might be like some like other project that you've done. I'm trying to remember like a calculator that you did in the 3000 web dev class. Maybe that's what project 1 is. You have to have like your calculator, and then description is like a calculator that we made in our web class, right? And then you have an image source is like a picture of a calculator, something like that, right? So each one would have very different content that just kind of describes what your project was, kind of give whoever's looking at your website kind of like a brief explanation into things that you worked on. It's just that here for the demo or for the workshop, everything just happens to have the same content to make things a bit easier. But ideally, it's going to be much different. So once you've added all 3 props to all 3 project cards, you may notice something in that image source for each project card. It's actually all the same. They're all using that same project placeholder, right? And for this workshop, that kind of makes sense, right? We don't necessarily have a thumbnail for each one, a different image for each one, right? And maybe when in the future, if you're adding more projects to this website, maybe you won't always have a thumbnail and you'll just want to use the placeholder until you get one, right? So project placeholder is actually a good default value for our image source, right? If we have one, if we have a thumbnail for a project, then we definitely want to use it. If not, just fall back and use our project placeholder instead. Unexpected. Unexpected. Okay, assuming I'm looking at your question, I'm getting this error, project card.jsx, unexpected token, expected JSX tag end. So it's saying that it doesn't have an ending tag. So I would just double check to make sure your H3 has both like an opening tag like this and a closing tag with the /. The line where, because the P tag that looks like should be fine. Yep, that was it. Okay, sweet. Cool, glad that was simple. So image source, right? We said if we have one, we want to use it, but we won't always have a thumbnail. So we want to fall back to this placeholder but not necessarily have to copy and paste it every single time like this. That just feels overly redundant. And it'd be much simpler if we could just say, hey, I have a default value for the image source that I want to use instead. So with the power of React, we can actually do that. We can say, hey, I have a default value that I want the image source to be. So if I do provide an image source, use that. If not, just fall back to the placeholder. So we can just tackle that. I'm going to pause briefly. It has a closing tag for H3. Getting this error for the line where still getting the error. I'm not sure. It sounds like something just doesn't have a correct closing tag like this. It's kind of hard to say. I would kind of leverage the project card solution in this case because it's going to look very similar to the final result here. So if you're still getting that error, try pasting in the solution and see if you can figure out what's different. Sumi, and see if that helps. See if you can like paste in the solution and see what's different. Maybe that'll help figure things out. But I'm going to continue with. You'll notice in the solution, it kind of has what I'm going into next. So I'm just going to briefly run through that. And then once we finish with the project card, I'll take another break and we can take a look at that if you're still having issues. So like I said, we want to have a default value for image source, and React is nice enough to give us a way to do that. So here, inside of our props object, like we have our image source attribute right here. All we actually have to do is say equals and then put whatever value we want that default value to be. So for us, that's going to be that /assets/project placeholder.svg. We can just paste that directly into there and say image source equals this. So I hit save and it'll format for me just to be a little bit nicer. But we're saying, hey, if I don't provide anything, just use this. So now if I get rid of an app.jsx, if I go to the first project card, I get rid of that image source prop and hit save, notice that nothing actually changes, right? So it's actually using this placeholder value, this fallback value, and it's rendering that because I didn't pass anything to it. So if I actually get rid of this, not a comma there, right? It goes away, but because we're adding a default value for it, it's going to use that in case we don't pass anything. And because it just so happens to be the same for all three of ours, we can remove the image source from all of our project cards inside of app.jsx, and notice that nothing changes. Everything is the exact same. But sometime in the future, we have an image source that we want to use for a certain project, we could then add whatever URL slash that is here, right? And that'll render our picture instead. But for our workshop, we don't have to worry about that. So that's our project card. So now we know, okay, props, really cool. We can leverage props to help drive our content, to help make components reusable. And we can even go the extra step of just making props conditional. We can say, hey, if you don't provide it, which you don't have to do if you don't want to, just use this value instead. And now that makes our lives, now that we're working at app.jsx, that makes our lives much easier. We don't have to copy and paste that same value every single time, right? We can just say, hey, use it if it exists, otherwise just use this. And that makes our lives as developers a lot easier. So I'll pause there, see how everyone's doing. If anyone has any questions, if anyone is stuck or is still, assuming if you're still having issues, let me know. We can try and figure those out.
Okay, so I just copy pasted the code from your solutions, and so it works now. So
Okay.
I must have messed something up, but I'm just like looking and trying to compare and find out what it is. It's probably just gonna end up being like a parentheses or something like that.
Yeah, more than like, that's what it sounded like from the error message, is just something small like that, yeah.
mm. But yeah, thank you
But
so much.
glad it, yeah, no problem. Glad it's working now.
Mm.
And if we get towards the end and it's still not clear, we can always take a look at it together.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. Anybody else? Anybody else having any issues or any questions or anything? All right, it doesn't look like it. So I think we're just going to continue moving on. If we take a quick peek, let's expand this window a bit. If we take a quick peek at our Figma, we are making really good progress. We have our app bar, our landing kind of section, and now we have our project section with our project cards. Right? We have our app bar, we have our about me section, we have our project cards. We are, what is that? What, 1, 2, 3, 4 sections? We are 3/4 of the way through. We're so close to finishing our portfolio here. We just have one more section to go. That's our experience section. So this has like the different accordions of the different experiences that maybe you want to outline on your website, that you know, course that you did that you really enjoyed, or that you learned a lot from, an internship, a job that you've had previously that you want to highlight, or even this super awesome React workshop, this one right here. You can also outline this one as well. So we're going to work on implementing that, and we'll leverage our snippets one more time. So if you go to the snippets folder, there's one more we haven't used, that's c.experience.mdx. We're going to do the exact same thing here, where we open that file, we copy all of that content in that file, and then in app.jsx, right in between our section and main tag. So right here, right there, in between the section and the main, we want to paste that content. And this one's pretty light, just a section tag with a nice div and a class name to help set up some of that, like help set some of that up. But we'll want to get that pasted in so that we can get started on our accordions. So I'll take a second, give everyone a chance to copy and paste that snippet. All right, and looks like we have another really helpful comment from past Matt. It says we'll need one of our headings for this new section. Oh, you're right, Matt. We have this experience header, just like all the others. Really good thing we made a component for that. So we'll want to put our experience heading. So heading, just like we did before, heading, opening and closing tag. And then in our heading, we just want to say experience and just say, and hit save. And make sure we want to add our ID so that our navigation will work. And there's our heading, right where we need it, right where the design asks for it. So super helpful. Again, we just added one line and we have this super nice heading that looks just like all the rest, with navigation automatically plugged in. So that's super neat. So now we have our heading. We really just need our accordions now, our experience accordions. I did not click and drag that. All right, so here's where we want to put our accordions to describe our experience. Again, the look and feel should be consistent. Only the content will really change, which makes it another great candidate for a component. The big kicker, how do we make it expand and collapse? The idea is that when you click the header, right, the title section of an accordion, when you click it, it expands if it's collapsed. And while it's expanded, if you click it again, it'll collapse once again. You can notice the arrow, it actually changes too. So that's how you can tell whether something is expanded or collapsed, is the direction of the arrow. So we'll need to include that as well. But like, how do we implement that kind of interaction? Well, let's take a look. If we look in our source folder, in our components folder, and then inside of there, there's one last folder called experience accordion. We're going to open the experience accordion.jsx file. Again, that source component experience accordion.jsx. Lots of little comments in here. So we'll have some props that we'll need, title and content. And then it looks like this is just the path for that little arrow looking thing, that caret arrow thing. So we'll need that for sure later on. So yeah, let's get started. I'm going to ignore this for now. And we're just going to work on getting our UI implemented. So just getting it to look like an accordion. So we're going to start with our favorite way to make a container, and that is a div. So we're going to make a div here, opening div and closing div. And then we're going to add a nice helpful class name of accordion. That comes straight from our experience accordion.css file. So we're just going to give that class name of accordion. And just to see how things are working, we'll give it some content so it renders to the page. I think the first one was, we can just say this awesome React workshop. Bang, bang. Okay, so we'll hit save and nothing rendered to the page. I know exactly why, because we're not rendering it to the page. We're never calling the function. We're never saying, hey, I want you to render. So we'll go back to our app.jsx, add our experience accordion, just like we did with a self-closing tag. So less than sign, experience accordion, just like we named it, and then the / greater than sign. All right, well, now if we hit save, we get something. We get a purple box that looks somewhat familiar, but it looks kind of weird. So we'll have to figure out how to do that. We'll have to figure out how to fix that, which we will. So we're actually, to fix that, I think we can take a peek at our CSS file. This will give us some hints. I see an H3. So maybe that has something that would make sense, right? If it's like a header, it's a heading, right? We want to label this accordion, and H3 makes sense for that. So we'll add a H3. Let me back out of that. So in between our div, space this out a little bit, make it easier to read. In our div and around the text that we wrote, we're just going to add an H3 tag here so that this awesome React workshop text is between our H3 and that H3 is between our div, just like that. So if we hit save, oh, we're getting a little bit closer. It looks like it's got bolded, nice little underline there. So that's great. And then let's see, let's take a peek back at our accordion.css. We have a button here. So it looks like we're going to need a button at some point. So actually with accordions, that would make sense, right? When you click something, and so say when the user like clicks on something on the page and they expect something to happen, right? Something to open, something to close, some type of user interaction with the page, we usually want to wrap that in a button. And that's really just for accessibility purposes. So someone knows that, oh, if something renders as a button on the page, then they immediately know that that's interactable, that that's clickable. So because our header, because like this top section, this bolded text is interactable, you can click on it, then we want to take advantage of that accessibility. So in this H3 tag, just like we did before, in this H3 tag, we're going to wrap this text with a button. So this is saying, hey, browser, this is something that the user can interact with, click on, and expect something on the page to change. We'll have to hook up some functionality, so we have to make it change, but we're just focusing on UI right now, so we don't have to worry about that too much. So as you can see, you're actually, if you hover over where it says this awesome React workshop, you can actually see your cursor actually changes. That's part of that accessibility advantage that we get by wrapping this on a button. And then one last thing we want to add to this header. So inside this button, we're getting really deep into this kind of structure here. Inside this button, we're going to add an image tag. And this source is going to be up here, this comment where we talked about the path for the arrow on the accordion. So we're just going to copy that path and paste that into our source. And so when we hit save, oh, it looks like it's just a bit too small. There we go. So that adds our little caret / accordion indicator, just like that design has. Yeah, so that's going to add, so right now the accordion is collapsed, so the arrow is pointing inwards, right? When it's expanded, it's going to point down. So that aligns with what the design has. And we're getting our green squiggle once again. So we'll add an alt tag here, just saying like arrow, arrow indicating collapse or something like that. Something to just help in case whatever reason that image doesn't load correctly. And that's looking pretty good so far. Take a brief pause there, give everyone a chance to get caught up. So we have our big container div here, and then inside that div we have an H3, which kind of gives us that heading, that bolded text saying, hey, this is important. This I label more content kind of thing. And then inside of our H3, we said we wanted this to be clickable. We wanted the user to be able to interact with this. So we then added a button, and inside of our button is where we add our content. So we add our arrow, which indicates whether it's expanded or collapsed, and we have the text that goes along with it. So this awesome React workshop. And that that's all the content we really need for the collapsed version of it. And we're going to want to add where the when it's expanded, we're going to want to add the content for there as well. So we're going to tackle that next. So outside of our H3, so we're still in this experience accordion.jsx file inside this div, but right after the H3, so in between this H3 and this closing div here, we're going to add a new div, and this is where the content of the accordion is going to go. So like when it's expanded, we want this content to show. So we'll add a div with a opening and closing tag and giving it a class name of accordion content. So accordion-content. Brief pause. And then inside of that div, our accordion content div, we're just going to add a nice little p tag, just like before with our project cards, just something to add some text into. So we can just say like, I don't know, we can just do some lorem ipsum text. So we can just say like lorem ipsum, or, you know, I attended this awesome React workshop. What we put here isn't really important. We just need to put something. Attended this awesome workshop. So you can put whatever you want in there for now. Content is not our main focus right now. But we can save that and nothing actually changes. We can't actually see anything yet because, well, it's not expanded. This is the content we'll see when it is actually expanded. But that's most of the UI pretty much done. We have a few more things to integrate, like we're going to want to integrate props, and obviously we're going to make this interactable. We want to expand and collapse it, and yeah, I think that's, we got to do that next, and then we're going to want 2 more of these as well. So so the next kind of big topic in React, right? We kind of talked about props earlier. We said props are huge in React. You really leverage props to help make things reusable and make components just that much easier to use, right? We've seen that so far with heading, with the project card, like simple components that we're able to reuse multiple times and really just make building this app so much easier. Props is a huge component of React. There is another component of React, granted there are many, but the next kind of like main thing to know about React is state. How we use state, how we leverage state is pretty much the meat and potatoes of React, really. So state is what allows us to change the page based on some type of interaction. So when I click a button and I expect something to change, I can use state to keep track of like the state of that component, whether it's collapsed, whether it's expanded, whether I've clicked it, whether it's focused, right? The state of different components is very important because then you can do different things like show different content, apply class names, do more accessibility stuff like that. So state allows us to really add like a whole different layer of interaction with our website. So how do we implement state? Well, in this case, we need state to keep track of whether our accordion is expanded or collapsed, right? If it's expanded, we want, you know, to show more content. If it's collapsed, we want to just show just the header part, right? And we want that state to change whenever the user clicks on the header or clicks on this button. So when I click on the button, if it's expanded, it becomes collapsed and vice versa, okay? So that's what we're trying to achieve. So how do we do that? So in React, there is a very important concept called hooks. Hooks you'll use a lot in your React career if you continue further, which I hope you do. But use state is like probably the most commonly used one. And we use state by saying constant, and then open close square brackets equals use state, open close parentheses. So use state is like a function. And then we'll put a semicolon at the end there. So if you scroll up to the top, you'll actually see we're importing use state from React. So use state is a hook or a function given to us directly from React to leverage and to use. And as you can see, this function actually returns an array where the first value of the array is like the current state. So whether we are currently expanded or not. So this is the current state of the application. And then it returns a second value. So we'll put a comma. And this is a function that allows us to modify the state or change the state. So we usually prefix this by saying set and then camel casing whatever the value is. So we'll say set expanded. So this returns an array where the first value is the current state and the second value is a function for updating our state. And the last thing that we can do is inside of this use state function, we can give it a default value. So we can say by default, I want the current state to be false. So this is going to be like a Boolean. So expanded is going to be true or false. And what we're saying here is that when the component initially renders, we want this value to be false. So now we can say, all right, well, we can keep track of whether an accordion is expanded or collapsed using this JavaScript variable. And we can actually, the way we make this accordion kind of open and close is just through CSS using class names. So we can say, so we're going to have to do some fancy JavaScript trickery here. So we're going to say this class name equals accordion on our div here. We're actually going to get rid of that temporarily. We're going to end up adding that back. But we're going to say class name equals and do open, close, curly braces. And then inside of those open, close, curly braces, we're going to do the backtick character. So looking at your keyboard, it's like the top left of your keyboard should be like a little backtick symbol. And this is called string interpolation in JavaScript. But this allows us to both put in strings. So here we can say accordion. We're going to add back that class name that we removed. We're going to say accordion, which gets interpreted as a string. But then we can say $, open, close, squiggly braces inside of those backticks. And that pulls us back into JavaScript land where we can leverage expanded. So we have these backticks. So once we're inside the backticks, we're in string land. So accordion is a string. It's being interpreted as a string. If we want to then go into JavaScript land, we can just say, hey, $, open curly brace. And then before the close curly brace, all of this is just JavaScript. We can put whatever JavaScript we want here. And we're actually going to do that by saying, hey, if expanded is true. So if expanded is true, we're going to add another class called expanded. So we're saying question mark, if expanded is true, then add the expanded class. Otherwise, denoted by this colon, we're going to say just an empty string. And so I'll try and spell this out, what exactly is happening. Comment these out. So we have this expression that says, okay, always have this accordion class. So I'm going to, down here, put the result of these expressions. So hopefully it makes it a bit more clear. So in the case, so if expanded equals true, then what gets rendered is expanded. So in the case that expanded equals true, this is going to be the result of this expression. So we're saying if expanded is true, then add this expanded class to the class name along with accordion, which results in a class name that looks just like that. So this is a ternary, right? If we're saying if expanded is true, then include it just like that. And if expanded is false, then we don't include it. So that's what that empty string right here is doing. So if this variable evaluates to true, then go through this branch, which we see here. And if this is false, we go through this branch, which is just an empty string, which leaves us with this result. So that's all that's really happening, is just some JavaScript magic to conditionally add this class based on the value of this variable. All right. So I'm going to delete that and save. So now we've kind of added our class so that we can both expand and collapse our accordion and kind of add these class names as we needed to, but nothing is going to happen quite yet, because you can see by these green squigglies that we're not actually updating this value, right? We've set it initially to false, but what we can do, we can actually change this to say true. We can say, hey, just for testing purposes, what happens if I set this to true? I hit save and boom, it's expanded. It's showing all of that content that we added down here. So this expanded class name is actually just increasing the height of the accordion to kind of expose this content. So now we can flip back and forth. We can say false to see it collapse. We can say true to see it expanded. So obviously we know this is working. So if we're doing our conditional correctly, now we just kind of want to do this without needing to like manually change this value, right? We want the user to be able to interact with this and make this happen. So I'm going to pause for just a second and give people a chance to catch up if they need to before we implement this set expanded function. Or if anyone has any questions so far, I can help answer. All right, well, let's keep going. Let's implement our set expanded function, right? Which this updates the state. This is a method for updating this value here. So buttons, right? They're the things that allow users to interact with our websites. So it has a special prop called onClick. So it's camel case onClick, just a prop, and we can set that equal to open, close, curly braces. And so we just want to provide a function that calls set expanded to the opposite value. So we're going to do an inline function here. So in JavaScript, we can do that by just saying open, close parentheses, equal sign, greater than sign, and then we can do whatever expression we need to do. So in this case, we want to set expanded, right? This is a method, so we need to call it. We need to invoke the method. And then here we just pass whatever we want the new state value to be. And we want it to be the opposite of what it currently is. So we're just going to toggle, right, true and false. So we can just say not expanded. So that not is like that exclamation point here. So this is saying the opposite, because this is a Boolean, if expanded is true, the not makes it false. So we set if expanded is currently true, we use the not to say, hey, make it false. So now that'll flip the value every single time that we click this button. So when we save that, we should now be able to click the header and expand and collapse our accordion. And you can see the arrow moves as well. It's pointing down when it's expanded. And we can interact with this all we want. Click as many times as we want to. It's going to flip back and forth for us because we said, hey, whatever the current state is, do the opposite. And do that every single time we click this button. So there we have a working accordion, and that's use state. That's how we leverage state in order to make highly interactive web applications in React. Like with JavaScript, you would have to query the document to get that button and then assign an onClick function and then do all of that stuff. No, we just need a state value to keep track of what the value is, and then directly inside of our JSX, we can do whatever conditional statements we need to. No jQuery needed. Whew. All right, so that's state. That's our state in the experience accordion. So back in our app.jsx, yeah, let's go back to our app.jsx. We currently have one of them in our app.jsx. So we switch over to our design here. We're supposed to have 3. So we're supposed to have 3 of those. So we can do what we pretty much did with the project card section, right? We can copy and paste this component 2 more times so that we have 3 of them in our app.jsx. Save that, and boom, we now have 3 accordions that all work. And notice how they all work independently of one another. So I can expand one, collapse, others, right? And they all have nothing to do with each other. They're all separate and independent of each other. So because we put all of the state in this experience accordion, every single one of these components manages their own state. So I can expand this one, expand that one, collapse this one, doesn't matter. They don't care about each other. They don't need to. We can all do it locally inside their own component. They can all handle their own state. So this may look very familiar to where we were with the project card. We have some hard-coded stuff, right? This hard-coded content here, this hard-coded content. So I'm going to once again give about 5 to 7 minutes for people to kind of refactor this to use props. So we have our props here, title and content. Just like with project card, we can leverage these props to make this content dynamic. So we can put whatever we want here and make this component just that more reusable. So we're going to give 5 to 7 minutes for people to give that a shot of their own, as well as ask questions. I'm going to take a step away for a second as well, give myself my own very quick break. And then, yeah, we'll come back to this in a couple minutes, and I'll run through it just like we did last time, so that we'll refactor this to use props, make it super reusable, and we'll continue into the final section right after that. So go ahead and give it a shot. Feel free to use the solutions if you need to, but definitely give it a shot on your own first and see if you can also get your accordion to expand and collapse just like that. Let us know if you have any questions or need any help. Glad to see that some of you are seeing the power that React can be, how simple it kind of makes interactions and how easy it is to kind of get things up and running and reuse things, right? Implementing things only once, reusing those things as many times as you need. Makes React super powerful. That's why so many companies use it, such as Facebook. I would give like another minute or so, and then we'll run through this. And then after this section, I'm going to kind of give like a brief kind of summary of all the code that we've written tonight. And then we're going to work on deploying this. We're going to ship this, get it deployed to a real URL that you can share with, friends, relatives, employers, add it to your resume. And we're going to walk through all of those steps to kind of show you how easy it can be to deploy a website of your own. So and then after that, we'll wrap up after that. All right, well, if you haven't quite finished, that's perfectly fine. Don't feel rushed. I'm just going to run through this very slowly and kind of refactor this to use props, just like we've done the other components, project card, heading, things like that. So let's tackle that. So as always, our props get passed in as a single object. We can call that props, or we can just destructure that and pull out the properties that we need. So in this case, we look at the props that we'll need that we have lovingly listed here. We'll need title and we'll need content, which makes sense, right? We have this hard-coded string, so that'll probably be title, right? We can replace that with title using our open close curly braces and then title in between there, just like before. And then our other hard-coded string here, which says like I attended this awesome workshop, that can be replaced by the open close curly braces and then content in between there. And so now we've kind of integrated props into our component. We can hit save. All of our content disappears. Everything still works. Just there's no text. We need to go back to our app.jsx file. So we'll try and keep both open here. Scroll down to our experience according to this. We have 3 of them, but we're not passing any props, so obviously nothing is going to get rendered. So we'll need to pass both title, which we can say, I'm going to leverage the design here on what to put. So the first one is software engineering course as the title. So we'll just put software engineering course. And then for the content, which is what's going to show up in the expanded section, we can just random text. I'm just going to copy the same exact thing, or just say like undergrad 3000 level web course. You know, obviously you would put kind of a more detailed explanation so that when someone says, oh, I wonder what they did in their software engineering course, you could click that and see all the details about, you know, oh, I did these kind of projects, I learned about this and all of these great things. So let's do the same for our other 2 accordions. Say title equals, and do a coding internship just for an example, and then content of something like learned or my first internship, something like that. Save, and now we have that one rendering nicely. And then we'll do the last one, title of this awesome React workshop. Hopefully that's not too long. Awesome. And then content of this super awesome React workshop I did thanks to Girls Who Code. Again, the content isn't too important right now. What matters is just getting something down just to verify that all of our components are integrated correctly. So now you can see all our content is there, all based on our props. And that's all of our experience. We can collapse things we don't care about, dig into things that we do. And there we are. That's looking just like the design there. We have our 3 accordions and then content underneath there with that nice little divider. That is looking pretty good. Now, trivia question. We don't have a prize. I'm sorry. Should have been more prepared. But there's these question marks here. So this is kind of referencing something we learned earlier on. There's probably another way, instead of accepting content here as a prop, there's probably another, probably better way to accept like this expanded, this content right here. There's probably a slightly better way of getting that content. Does anybody have any guesses? You can post it in the chat if you have any thoughts on, instead of content, maybe there's like a different prop we can pass this as that might make more sense. Anybody have any guesses? Was referenced earlier on in the course. Paragraph? No, not quite. It is a prop. It's a special prop, actually. It's a special React prop. Description? No, not quite. Children, yeah, absolutely. So children, we could put here instead of content. And so the reason that children could be better here, so like I said, it's built in. So we're going to say children and then replace content with children. So notice that when we put content here, it's really just a string, and that's really it. But when we use children, right, if we were to save everything right now, nothing shows up here, right, because content no longer exists. We can take this guy out, get rid of that. And now remember how we use children, this becomes like a full component, so experience accordion. And in between this opening and closing experience accordion tag, this is where we would put our content. So we can paste in undergrad 3000 level web course, right? And now it appears because we put it as like a child of this experience accordion. But I mean, what's the real benefit of like doing two separate things like that? Well, now you can add more tags into here to kind of style the content. You can style the content more. So if I wanted to be a rebel and you still use the B tag, right? Because I wanted to emphasize that it's a 3000 level course, boom, I can add more HTML, more JSX to this content and say 3000 level, and now it's bolded, right? So I can add spans, Ps, paragraph tags, more class names to style this content. Whereas before, when it was just a string, we couldn't do that. We couldn't add any more elements. It was just a string. But now that it's children, we have so many more ways to format and kind of lay out this data. We can add like an entire table in here if we really wanted to. So this just kind of really opens the door for just more flexibility and things like that. So yeah, this children way. So title, right, might not change very much. You might not want it to change, but content, you know, really gives you that flexibility to do it however you want. Yeah, more options, exactly. So we'll just quickly refactor this to use the new children. You can choose to use children, or you can just leave it as is. For the sake of this workshop, I think only strings works perfectly fine. It's going to end up looking the exact same in the end regardless. So I'll just add those real quick just to make sure everything is looking good. I'm going to get rid of my B tag here. There we go. That is our website. That's everything. I'll quickly expand this. And that's everything. We have our app bar. We have our landing section with the about me, our name, the nice little illustration, our project section with the different projects that we've done with thumbnails, which reminder we used as a we use our default props for. And then we have our accordions, which we can expand and collapse all independently of one another. So yeah, that's our website. Let's quickly, so that's a quick run through of everything. And might I add, man, it looks so much like the design. We're so good. We're such good developers. All right, so let's run through. I'm gonna hide this preview. And we're going to take a look back at all of the code we've written and kind of do like a summary, everything that we've learned throughout the course. So we started here, right? We had nothing. Remember, all we had was I need content, and it was just some black text in the top left corner of a white page, right? Super boring. But what we first did was we added the app bar component. So we jump into the app bar. We just said, hey, we want a header for accessibility. And we added a couple divs, said just for styling purposes, we added this div, a span with our name, and then our different navigation links using different HTML looking semantic elements to one, make our site accessible, and two, get the layout just how we want it to match the design. And include like functionality using our anchor tags with our different navigation. So we started with the app bar, pretty simple component, didn't take any props, didn't use state or anything like that. We just need that content in this place, and we just wanted to name it something that made sense. And that if we needed to use it somewhere else, it's there. We can just import it and render it just like this. So we added some snippets of code to kind of get like some of the main content down. And then we started working on our heading component, and this was our introduction to props. So with the heading component, we needed that ID to help with that navigation, right? Because before, when I said those anchor tags would then automatically scroll the page to whichever element had that ID. So that's why we added this ID. And then we learned about children, that special React prop, to then take whatever is between the opening and closing tag of this heading element and said, okay, take all of the children, everything in between this heading, and just put it in between this span to be rendered to the screen. So we learned about props there, including children, and then just some more kind of about me text, right? We use lorem ipsum to kind of fill that in. We moved on to the project section where we added our heading. So nice that we made this a reusable component that was able to use props for content, so that all we had to do was just add this heading and boom, everything's done for us. Navigation and styling. And then we worked on our project cards, where we really just wanted to make sure it was semantically correct so that it was accessible to our users and made sense to like screen readers and things like that. But also we learned that in React, you can provide default values to props. So in this case, where we didn't actually have a thumbnail for any of our projects, we could provide a default value so that we didn't necessarily have to provide it. But if we had one, we could use it. If not, we just fell back to this default value. And that worked out really nicely for us because it kind of removed some redundancy that we had initially. And then finally, we once again added our experience heading as easy as before. And we learned about state in React. We learned how to allow a user to kind of interact with things on the page, to kind of make things happen, make things change. And it was just as easy as adding a hook called useState and kind of building that into our class name. It's just using the power of JavaScript to construct our class name and kind of change the page based on the value of state. And that's it. That's our app. All that culminated into this page. If codesandbox would like to enlighten us. So it was been told to me when I was first learning React that if you understand props and state, then you know React. So that was pretty much the purpose of this workshop, is to help introduce these two main concepts. One, get you a little bit familiar with JSX to kind of expose you to it, how very similar to HTML, though not quite the same, as well as introduce you to the idea of props and state and how it can be leveraged to make a really interactive website. So if you know props and states, you know React. So that's what I wanted to focus on. And definitely the two main concepts to focus on initially, I would say. And I agreed with them. So we have a website. I'll pause there to see if anyone needs me to like open a file back to reference something, go back to that. Yes, I can absolutely do that. And if there's a certain section you need to see or anything like that, please let me know. But yeah, I'll pause here, make sure everyone's caught up, because next we're going to be deploying this using something called Vercel. So definitely take a second to get caught up. Let me know if you have any questions, need any help with anything, because this ends the coding part of the workshop. So any questions that you have, go ahead and ask them now. And as a reminder, all of the solutions are in that solutions folder, including app.jsx. So if you're doing this later or you're coming back to this sometime in the future and to finish something, or maybe you skip something initially that you want to come back to or anything like that, the solutions folder is there for you to reference. I think the only difference is that in the solutions, I didn't do this children thing. I just left it as content prop. I think that's pretty much the only difference between this final product and what solutions has. So just a little small tidbit that I added, but that is definitely there for you to leverage. in case you want to come back to this. Just going to give like another minute or so in case anyone needs anything, and then we'll move on. All right, so yeah, definitely leverage those solutions if you're not quite finished, but we're going to move on to deployment. We're going to ship this thing to the moon, to the cloud actually. But so in Code Sandbox, actually I think I have some slides on this that I may have closed earlier. So let me open those back up. That's not helpful. Slides.google.com. All right, and they're just some brief slides. So remember, we ended here. Let's learn some React. Well, we've learned some React and we've built some stuff. So let's, we've set up Code Sandbox. We did that. We forked the starter code and wrote all our code, built out our app, and we're pretty happy with it. Matches the design. Product owners are happy. And now it's time to ship it with a rocket ship to the moon, to the cloud. So we're going to use Vercel to deploy to Code Sandbox. So Vercel, I'm going to paste this link in the chat. You go to vercel.com and you can sign up using your GitHub account. You can sign into a lot of services using your GitHub account, which is why it was the requirement. So you're going to go to vercel.com and we're going to click sign up. And then you can sign in using GitHub. Vercel is free. I use it a lot for my projects when I'm deploying front-end apps. So you're not going to be charged. You're not going to be asked for a credit card or charged for anything like that. So you're just going to continue with GitHub and get signed in. And then once you have a Vercel account set up, we're going to, actually I'm going to take a second and let people get that settled, get those accounts created with Vercel. Should not take too long. And then once you've created your account in Vercel, we're going to come back to Code Sandbox. All right. So we're going to go to, so in Code Sandbox, once you've created your account, we're going to come over here to the Launchpad, or this, it's like a rocket looking icon. When you hover over it, it should say deployment. We're going to click on that. And yours might look slightly different because I have deployed this a couple times in testing. But you should see, this should say Vercel. You should see a little box that says Vercel once you click on deployment. And it should say like link account with Vercel or some type of linking thing that you can do. You want to click the button that says link with Vercel, and you'll have to like agree, you know, both services will have to shake hands saying, yes, you can interact with each other, and say like, yes, it's okay if Vercel looks at my Code Sandbox. So click that button, agree with that, saying, yes, Vercel can see my Code Sandbox. And then it should say you can deploy, then you can deploy with Vercel once you've agreed to there. And we can say deploy Sandbox to production. Let's go, let's push it. Let's deploy it. Let's get it out there for the people to see. And then I'll actually do that as well. So deploy Sandbox to production. That kicks things off. And you'll see deployment. Once you've got things linked and you've clicked deploy Sandbox to production, you'll see it says deployed. And it gives you a nice little URL. So we can click on that. Man, I really didn't want me to navigate away from that, but that's okay. And that'll actually take you to the Vercel website where you can see our website is currently building. And if I ran through that too fast and I need to go back to something, please let me know. Otherwise, you see your site building here on Vercel. It might be a white background for you. I got dark mode enabled. dark mode for life. But you should see it building. And after about a minute or so, because it's a very lightweight app, because we're very efficient with our things, it should see check marks all down the side, status of ready, and we can click the visit button and we can see our website. It's shipped. I can share this URL with everybody. I can copy this, open a private window, right? This isn't like local or anything like that. This isn't tied to anything specific, right? This is deployed. People can go to this page, see it, navigate to it, and interact with it all the same, just like in our code sandbox. So there you have it. Your page is now shipped. It's deployed. And you can easily make updates to it. So let me go back to code sandbox here. If you say come back and you like want to work on the content, right? Say you want to like update the about me section, we can say go back to our app.jsx, make any changes that we want to. So we can get rid of this, and it's like my name really is Matt and I do cool stuff, right? You can edit content. All you have to do, it's like, okay, that looks good to me, is go back to the deployment tab, hit deploy with Vercel again, deploy to production, and that'll kick off a new build with your changes. So making changes and getting things shipped is just that easy. Sign up, all you did was sign up with an account with Vercel. You clicked a couple buttons on Code Sandbox. Your React application is now deployed for the world to see. Yeah, feel free to share your websites. If you got it shipped, feel free to share them in the chat. Show them off. Let's see your stuff. It's definitely something to be proud of. Your first React application, possibly. If you've never done React before, your very first React application, it's shipped for the world to see, and it's just that easy, a couple clicks away. And it's super easy to make updates. And Vercel has it where you can do custom domains and stuff like that. So you can like do a custom URL. If you want to make it like your name or something like that, you can totally do that with Vercel. It's very, you do a lot of cool things with Vercel. But yeah, that's it. It's deployed. We started with text. We actually started with nothing. Then we said, hey, Code Sandbox, I have stuff I want to do. And right now you're just showing me a bunch of text, right? And nothing else. And we said, hey, is it free to change the name in Vercel? You mean like the domain? Like the URL, like this URL? Yeah. So yes. So you can go to the project and go to settings. And then there's a section for domains. And so I've actually done it myself. As long as you own the domain, so you have to pay for the domain, right? Once you have one, you can use it for free in Vercel. So like I own mattwells.dev, so I don't have to pay anything extra in Vercel to use that, if that makes sense. So like I can go to, I have it set up so it'll go to gwc react portfolio.mattwells.dev, right? So it's shipped here. You can see my latest changes, right? And it's under that domain. And Vercel, if that was too fast of a run through, Vercel has lots of documentation on how to configure their stuff, and it's really good. And Vercel actually, they work on a React framework. So a framework on top of React, which is already a framework called Next.js. That's very popular. A lot of people like it, including myself. But that's thinking way far ahead. But yeah, so that's everything. That's all I wanted to show you guys. We went from nothing to shipped in just a few hours. I would pause for like a couple minutes to see if anybody wants me to run through anything one more time, if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, we're going to start to wrap up here in just a few minutes. Only the first website we deploy is free. I don't think that's the case. So I'll show you mine at least. I have 8 projects, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 6 projects deployed right now, and I haven't paid a dime. So I would consult. I promise they're not like burning money. Like they have their own ways of making money, but Vercel is mostly like company backed. So there are companies choose to support Vercel for different reasons. So they make their money through corporations, not through users like us paying them. So if we look at, so I'm obviously using the hobby account, which is free. So you can do 100 deployments per day, 12 serverless functions. Like these are your restrictions, right? Hobby is free. So you can do anything in this hobby section for free without anything. And so does this say anything about projects? Vercel projects connected per Git repository. Per Git repository. So maybe there's like a limit there. Yeah. So yeah, those are your limits for using Vercel. And you know, it'll just stop you, right? If you try and go beyond that. And if you need more, you go like to Pro, where you then have to pay something. If you want, like, if you need more. But for me personally, I've done quite a few projects, and hobby has worked perfectly fine for me. Experience accordion.jsx, absolutely. There we go. And then in just about 3 minutes or so, we're going to start wrapping up. I think I just have like a couple slides to finish off with, and then some more announcements, and then I think we'll call it a day. Yeah, no problem. Like I said, about 3 minutes or so, we'll move on. Yeah, GitHub Pages is also a way that works. GitHub Pages is like, it's a little bit trickier with React projects because there's like a build process that everything has to go through, which is definitely doable. It's just a little bit more like manual work for you to go through. With Vercel, it does all that building for you. Like you saw that building step it was doing. It was compiling all of that JSX code into like normal JavaScript, HTML, and stuff like that. So Vercel just kind of makes it a little bit more streamlined. But yeah, it's definitely doable to use GitHub Pages as well. It's a super great way to ship static websites. Some other ones are like, well, I had it. So I use Heroku for some stuff for some projects that are more full stack. And then there's also Netlify. They're very similar to Vercel. So if you ever run out of free stuff on Vercel, just go to Netlify and use their free stuff until you run out of there, and then go to a different service and, you know, play the service game, play the deployment game. And if you're really committed, you can compile all of your React code to static files and then put it on an Amazon S3 bucket and configure that as a website server, as a web server. I wouldn't recommend it, but that was like how I figured out how to do it when I was first learning React, and it was awful. But it is possible. It is a possible way. All right, so definitely leverage those solutions. If you weren't able to complete this quite yet. But we're going to move on to our last couple slides here. Really, I just want to say, like, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. This is like one of my, haven't done quite a lot of talks and, you know, or like tutorials or workshops or anything like that. This is one of my, so I definitely appreciate you all for coming. This is how you can stay in touch with me in case you're interested. There's my LinkedIn, my GitHub, my email, if you're interested in like reaching out or anything like that. Hope to do more workshops like this in the future. If Girls Who Code wants to invite me back, I definitely would be interested. But yeah, if you're interested, definitely take a picture. I think we're going to share these. I think we can share these slides afterwards as well. And then outside of that, I'm going to hand it back over to Ashley, or yeah, Ashley, right, to kind of give some more event updates and announcements coming soon. Yeah, thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it.